Okay, so this is like the first video that I'm gonna make where I might actually edit some things here and there, because I kind of learned how to do that. But then I learned how to do that a long time ago, but then it's just one of those things where I'm more like, in order to unlock a skill, I have to do it for somebody else first. I guess that doesn't really make too much logical sense, but okay, so, this channel, we've given updates on this channel, and I was trying to figure out how to proceed with a new format, a more, I guess, palpable to the masses kind of thing, without really compromising the integrity of the wanton clusterfuck that is my life. I try and, I guess I should back up here a little bit, but I live with a very stigmatized and a condition that people are generally afraid of, and so one of the things I try and do with this channel is demonstrate, listen, schizophrenia, it's not something to be afraid of, it's not something super dangerous or bad, and people gotta chill their shit about that, so I just try and put on display the way that people like me, mainly just me, because I can only be myself, but the way that we think, which is different, and I assert that it's okay to be different, and it's okay to think differently about thinking, but that's just my position on it. Now, in my life, there are things that happen to me that are a big, you could say, big contributing factor into how I wound up with this condition, and of course, part of that stems from childhood rape. And yesterday was a very exciting day for me because I finally had like the mental fortitude within myself to go to the police of my own volition and report what happened to me. And it's really hard to explain, I guess, what that's like to because I remembered fully consciously what happened to me about 6 years ago, and it happened to me when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and it took this span of time to think about it and be able to talk about it in a way that wouldn't send me into like a supremely emotional state. Now, the thing is, I'm one of those crazy people that believes mental illness as it's presented, the understanding of mental illness as it's presented to the public is fundamentally flawed. The idea that people behave strangely because there's some unspecified imbalance of chemicals in their brain is bupkis. There's no evidence for it or anything else like that. So, it's and I've always kind of thought that the real cause behind these conditions is trauma. Like shit you've been through. In my case, rape. The thing that I think is probably the most gruesome about the way people who think differently are treated is that there is the one-size-fits-all approach in our state-run healthcare system in the wonderful Canada, and the one-size-fits-all approach that puts every single person experiencing emotional distress in front of a psychiatrist, regardless of whether or not they want to meet with a psychiatrist, regardless of whether or not they think there's any validities to the claim of the psychiatric practice. If you're having an emotional experience that is maybe a little too much, you will be brought before a psychiatrist. And in my opinion, I think that's wrong. And in fact, I would argue that in the, so there's that. I went and reported the childhood shenanigans that happened to me. And the other thing that I have going on is I'm doing what's called a constitutional question at the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. Now, this action was filed in 2017 of November against the then Attorneys General Yasser Naqvi under the Liberal government. The current Attorneys General under the Conservative government, from what I understand, is Caroline Mulroney, daughter of the former Canadian Prime Minister who introduced the GST sales tax to Canadians, which is fine. Now, I wanted to try and reason through a little bit of what this case really hinges on. Because mental health laws generally won't apply to people in the general public. And so, obviously, there is not a lot of concern about how that system operates and whether or not there's the proper checks and balances that one would reasonably expect there to be within the system. And of course, the only people that know that there aren't any reasonable checks or balances that one might reasonably assume would be associated with such a system, the only people that know that are the people that have been subjected to the psychiatric system. And of course, no one will listen to people that have been subjected to the psychiatric system because that's de facto proof that they're crazy. Do you see the problem with this yet? So I'm just going to go through, because this is some of my case file that's being sorted off, that I'm going through, and because when you do a constitutional question, it's not just like a simple little thing. It's you have to really make a pretty strong case for what the hell you're talking about. So I have my little tabbies here, and I go through these different incidences of psychiatric arrests that I've been subjected to. So for one of the psychiatric arrests I was subjected to, it was like in these phone calls, he spoke nonsensically about religion, Hitler, and other topics out of the ordinary. Now, the Charter says that we have the right to the freedom of conscience and freedom of expression. So can someone please point to the law that says you are required to make sense every time you speak? I'm pretty sure you won't find any. Now, another thing that's noted in this particular event is that I was at a friend's house, having grabbing a fresh in their bathtub, and I guess someone in the house called and said I wasn't welcome. And the thing is they never told me I wasn't welcome in their house. They never said, hey, can you beat it? They just called the police directly. And so that's a violation of my 15.1 Charter rights, which is equality before the law. Because if they felt I was trespassing in their home, then charge me with trespassing, where I'm entitled to a criminal defense and an explanation as to what's happened or to why I'm there. Instead, what happens in the mental health system is when someone is accused of behaviors that are covered under the criminal code, instead of getting the equality to the law that we're promised in the Charter, someone that is suspected of suffering from a mental health issue is instantly robbed of their rights to a fair trial, so that's as they say in social justice circles, problematic. Another aspect here, and these are all from police reports and medical records. These are things that I'm reading that they wrote. And these things, although you might think, oh, well, we can't have people like that running around and talking on the streets, guess what? that's the right to freedom of conscience and the freedom of expression, is hearing people say things that you don't like or things that maybe don't make sense. People have the right to not make sense. And if that doesn't make sense to you, you're insane. It says subjects seemed out of touch with reality and confused. He talked about death and finding God and advised he did not care if he lived or died. Now, that's like a very parsed down version of a rather in-depth conversation that I was trying to have. But again, this is the thing, is like, you talk about things in a different way, and because you talk and think in a different way, you are then subjected to forcible incarcerations. So this is an incident here going back to 2009. That's one of the first incidences in Toronto. So that's the 2009. What do we got here? Is this the one? Okay, this is 2010. Okay, now this is an interesting one because they say in this statement that he was brought to hospital by police after he pinned his landlady to the wall and smashed a phone on the wall beside her. That isn't true. That's never been... But again, the fact that that's in this psychiatric record, it's like, this is proof of an alleged criminal act that I have supposedly committed. And instead of affording me the right to offer a defense to this allegation, I'm subjected to being stripped of my clothes, tied up in a bed, and injected with a bunch of mind and brain damaging chemicals, things that I don't want. And I would argue further that any instance where an individual is having psychiatric drugs forced into their body definitely falls under Section 12 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is, of course, we should not be subjected to cruel and unusual punishment. Now, this gets into the next incident here is in 2011 during the Occupy protests. This was an instance where I advocated for the freedom of people that have mental health diagnosis and stuff at a protest, and the way that the people at the protests reacted. And there's a lot of other political considerations to consider for the Occupy clusterfuck that was. So a lot of those people would take and they would report me for thinking differently. And I actually ran into one of those pricks on the street recently, and they threatened to beat me up because I voted conservative in the last election and publicly supported the Conservative Party. And that's the interesting thing about these Occupy libtards. They don't care about justice. They don't care about reason or rationality. It's you agree with them because they're right, or they will beat you up. And that's the age of political violence that we live in. So here it is. They say Thomas Zog suffered from schizophrenia and refuses to take medication. They also reported to officers that he has not had an injection of medication in approximately 3 weeks. So these people in St. James Park who knew nothing about me decided that even though I'm a schizophrenic person that lives without medication, totally fine most of the time, and I'm totally able to function without it, these people decided that they were going to put themselves in charge of my health care because the label schizophrenia means I don't know anything about my own self. Which is like, thank you for making me a second-class citizen, Government of Ontario, and negating my rights. That's fantastic. Officers attempted to speak with Zog, but he was rambling a stream of consciousness. Well, again, I have the freedom to express myself. I'm sorry that your street thugs are too stupid to interpret high thinking. Persons present Persons present reported it was not due to drugs, and their attempts to reason with him were met with increasing violence. Now, these people use the word violence to say, "Don't talk to me like that!" Someone that's asserting and not wanting bullshit. Now, that was angry, what I just said there. Is that violence? No, violence is physical contact. Me telling you to fuck off loudly means fuck off, stop fucking with me. But this is the whole problem with these social justice warriors and the way that they've tried to redefine violence as something that includes speech. Violence doesn't include speech, dumbass. Speech is speech because it avoids fucking violence. I get very upset because I've been tortured for 10 years. And why was I tortured for 10 years? Because I got bullied a lot as a kid. Why did I get bullied a lot as a kid? Because I got raped as a kid. You see how that's a compounding thing? And then the people that are labeled mentally ill are essentially where, because the whole thing in Western civilization, right, is that corporations run the Western world, and one of the major attributes of corporations is that they like to externalize complex problems, which is to say, ignore complex problems and put them off until to someone else. Now, I read here in another incident in also 2011 from the same protest. And I just think it's kind of interesting that here in the police report, they say that there was a charge, and the arrest was under the Mental Health Act, Section 17, which is one of the acts that I'm constitutionally challenging. And in the police's records, it says accused, and then it refers to me. So if the police are referring to these people that are being detained and brought to psychiatric facilities, if they're refusing to them, if they're referring to them in their own documentation as the accused, and the actions that they're taking are being referred to as a charge, this demonstrates a fundamental violation of anyone that's been forcibly detained under this section of law of their charter rights. And that's what this case is about. People have the right to be crazy. The minute that they commit behaviors that cross the threshold of the Criminal Code of Canada, charge them with a crime. Because that's equality under the law. However, to say that there is evidence, to refer to a person as an accused, and then not give them a trial where that evidence is weighed, and to just assume that the person is guilty and that what the mob is saying about them is true, that's the whole issue that we're dealing with here. You know, the way I look at it is that people shouldn't be forced to receive psychiatric treatment if they don't want psychiatric treatment. That's a civil liberty issue. And so this is fundamentally what this case is about. Now, my main goal in this case, this is what I read in the notice of application served to the previous attorneys general back in 2017. The Ontario Mental Health Act, sections 15.1a, b, d, and e contravene 15.1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. 15.1.1a, c, and d contravene sections 2a and b of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Ontario Mental Health Act, sections 16.1a and b contravene sections 15.1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Ontario Mental Health Act 16.1c, d, e, f, 1a, b, c, and d contravene sections 10b, 10c, and 12 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as well as section 7. Section 18 contravenes sections 7, 8, 9, and 12 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Ontario Mental Health Act sections 19 contravenes section 10c of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. OMHA section 53 contravenes section 12 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and OMHA section 54 contravenes section 7 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And then Ontario Mental Health Act section 26 contravenes section 2b of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So, what does all of that jargon mean? What I'm trying to explain to the legally minded people who run the justice system in Ontario is that these set of laws that allow for people to be forcibly incarcerated in psychiatric facilities and to be forcibly treated against their will, they violate various sections of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, as I read out in that. And my what I would like to see happen from this, what I would like, is that the sections that I've cited of the Mental Health Act that allow for people to be forcibly treated against their will, I would like those sections to be struck down as they're unconstitutional. That's the first thing that I'd like. The second thing that I'd like is my own psychiatric record and all of the police reports connected to all of this bullshit. I would like that to be expunged. Why? Because you detained me under a set of broken laws, and the government currently has a whole bunch of information on me that is frankly none of its fucking business, that it obtained via torture about me. So I would like that information totally deleted. The third thing that I've requested is compensation to the tune of $21 million. How did I arrive at $21 million? Well, I'll put it to you this way. Forced psychiatric treatment is a form of torture. The United Nations recognizes that. Now, Omar Khadr killed a Canadian, or killed an American GI, an American medic, and injured another GI. And he, was tortured in an American prison because the Canadian government under Stephen Harper refused to do its job and bring Mr. Khadr back to Canada. That's why Mr. Khadr received his $10.5 million settlement. Well, guess what? I didn't kill anyone. I haven't participated in any terrorist acts against the Western world. And the Western world tortured me simply for expressing ideas that I have that actually seem to be about the pinnacle of Western values as far as civil liberties and the rights of an individual. So I requested $21 million because that's twice what Omar Khadr got, and I think that's fair because I was never tortured. Or because I was tortured and I never committed terrorism in order to justify being tortured in the first place. Now that all of that being said, I'm aware that this is the first time in a long time that we have a government in Ontario that actually wants to try and get the province back to work and fix the bloody economy. And frankly, is $21 million, can the province afford to give me $21 million right now for torturing me for the span of 10 years? I don't know. I don't know if that's a fair extra burden to put on the tax-paying public. So my hope is that this video kind of gathers a little bit of steam, perhaps, and it gets in front of Miss Mulrooney, the new Attorneys General, and that we're able to come to a conclusion about this problem that can allow these laws to be struck down that will protect civil liberties. And I mean a little bit of compensation for the over a decade of being tortured. Because the thing is when you're constantly being mental health arrested for the way that you think, and you try and get help for some of these issues that you remember from your childhood, and the forced treatment that you receive instead of treatment that you consent to, that's the whole problem right there. So I hope this was sort of coherent and sort of made sense. And if you hate people that are conservatives, you're not very nice. I've been a liberal for a while, and what shifted me towards conservative thinking was basically the irate manner in which many liberals conduct themselves today. I don't want to be associated with that type of unhinged behavior. Hilarious, right? All right, hope you're having a great day. Ciao.